we thought we would just start out this evening talking about the issue, the question that probably brought us to this particular venue in the first place, which is that we are both writers and Jews. We are therefore Jewish writers. A rabbi asked Philip Roth, "Do you like being called a Jewish writer?" And he said, Philip Roth said, "I prefer to be called an American writer." Isaac Singer is a Yiddish writer. Amos Oz is a Hebrew writer. A writer is defined by his language.
No, I think that's certainly true. But I think that writers of Roth's generation, to them, to be called a Jewish writer implied a kind of ghettoization that for us is, I think we just don't experience that anymore. I think that, I don't know about you, but I think personally, if someone says that I'm a Jewish writer, I don't have a visceral reaction
What
to
about
that.
this thing about that it's your language that makes you a writer?
The language in which you write? I think it's certainly a huge part of it, don't you agree? But it's not all.
I don't know. It's complicated because when you think about Franz Kafka, he was Czech. He was from Prague.
Right.
But he wrote in German.
Right.
He's considered a German writer. You would never call him a Czech writer. It is a complicated question.
Right.
But I think the thing with Philip Roth, I think what you initially started out talking about is that you sometimes, and he's answered that question similarly a lot over the years, is you sense him bridling a little bit, right? Like to be defined as a Jewish writer, if you are from Philip Roth's generation, or the ones before, or maybe the half generation or so after.
Is to be ghettoized.
Right.
Is to be put on a special shelf in the bookstore, on a special table.
Right.
And, one of the things that I think, you and I were talking about this, I bridle in the same way that Philip Roth bridled when someone says to me, "Oh, you're a woman writer." As if by implication your work would only be interesting to women, and somehow, because only interesting to women, somehow lesser. And I imagine that was something like what Philip Roth was feeling when he was asked that question 30 years ago.
I think the reason we can feel the way we do, where if someone asked me, "Are you a Jewish writer?" I'd be like, "Well, duh, yes, fine." I don't, as long as you're not attempting to pigeonhole me or sort of confine me or dismiss me in some way with that label, I'm completely comfortable with that. I like it, actually. Right? And and the thing is, it's the writers like Roth and Mailer and Malamud and Saul Bellow and
Cynthia Ozick,
like that whole generation that started to publish in the 50s, essentially. It's because of those, right, that generation, that post-war generation, and the struggle that they undertook on our behalf, that they fought, like a writer like Saul Bellow, the way that he wrote made it impossible to ghettoize his work in some way. He forced the literary establishment and those other writers forced the, heavily WASP-dominated American literary establishment to accept them as American writers. So I think for Philip Roth to say he's an American writer probably feels like it means something different than it would to me.
Something deeper.
More, and something more hard-won and fought for. And then when the first sentence of The Adventures of Augie March is, the first 4 words are, "I am an American."
Right.
That's the opening of that book. And I think that, to me, that's something I don't feel like I need to say at all. It feels like it's accepted. But it's a weird thing. Then the whole ghetto thing is a weird thing, too. The ghettos in the bookstores. Remember Tayari Jones, an African-American writer, wrote this piece about how incredibly proud she was. I think after her first novel came out, this is about 10 years ago, she went into her Barnes & Noble where they have an African-American literature section, and she saw her book in that section, and she was just brimming over with excitement and pride because this was her first book. And then she went over to the fiction section, and it wasn't there. And all of that pride that she felt just evaporated immediately, and she realized, wait, does this mean only black people are going to see my book and read my book? It's a tricky problem that I think American Jewish writers don't face
have anymore,
but we used to.
as a Jewish writer, I felt the subject of the Holocaust looming for me from the moment I first started writing. The idea of whether I would write a novel that touched in some way on the Holocaust. I knew that I wanted to. But there was also this real fear and trepidation. And one of the things I talk about when I'm talking about that when you're not around is I always say that there's so many ways to write awful novels about the Holocaust. Novels that are that just are exploitative in the most terrible ways. But on the other hand, I also had the image of your novel, Cavalier and Clay, which I think is really, I mean, I'm not just blowing smoke here, baby.
Thank you.
I think it really handles that subject with
I know
such...
you like that book. I know that. You don't.
But it handles that subject with such grace.
I feel like if you come of age as a Jewish writer, there's this sort of warning monster that's been placed in the path of all writers, all those who at least didn't have any firsthand direct experience. So like not a Primo Levi, he's not going to be warned this, but anybody else, that you probably shouldn't try.
Right.
And if you do try, you'll probably fail.
Right.
And the way you'll fail will be embarrassing and horrible.
Right.
Right? And so, I internalize a lot of that. And so there's a part of me as I'm approaching The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, and I'm writing, because I'm writing about the golden age of comics, which starts about 1938 and is tied directly to the rise of, to the beginning of World War II and the Nazi menace, and Superman kind of made his name fighting Nazis in the comics. So, I have to deal with this subject. I have to deal with the war. I want to write about Jews, and I had this fear. I had anxiety, and something similar to what you're talking about experiencing with Love and Treasure. Like, how do I do this and not get trampled by this horrible warning monster that's going to realize what I'm doing is kitsch or it's whatever. Both times in my work where I've dealt with this subject, I've tried to find ways of doing it that are kind of indirect and glancing. So, Joe Cavalier leaves before. He leaves in March 39. And it all happens kind of off stage in that book, and you hear about it, but I didn't experience it, you don't experience it, the reader doesn't experience it, it's all off stage.
When I was writing Love and Treasure, I don't know if you remember this, but I wrote 2 scenes at some point in the many drafts of that novel. I wrote 2 scenes that were set in Dachau. Almost as soon as I finished that draft of the book, I realized I had to cut it out. And I cut out everything in that book that took place during the war. Everything. And I felt like I know there are people who could write novels that that have artistic integrity set during the war, but I couldn't. I could only do it around and from the side, in that way that you were saying, from the side. I don't think it's a sign of cowardice. I think it's a sign of, I think it's understanding the way that you need to avoid that pitfall of exploitation, which is a terrible one.
Right, and it's also it's a aesthetic technique that can be quite effective if part of what you're trying to do is convey horror, to not represent it. There's a great tradition in literature and in film of generating incredible feelings of disgust and horror and repulsion without actually showing anything that's particularly hard to look at. There's a wonderful horror story by a British writer named M.R. James where this spirit takes over a bed sheet, and all that happens in the story is there's just this description of a wrinkled sheet sort of moving around, but when you read it, the hair stands up on the back of your neck even though it's just a bed sheet.
Well, all right, move on to the second one, which was family.
Both of us have written essays that were collected that deal in various ways with our kids and with our marriage.
I wrote Bad Mother, and Michael wrote Manhood for Amateurs, and they're both in many ways about, well, mine is more overtly, but yours as well. It's really about a fatherhood. It's a book about being a father. Right. And a father, a husband.
Relationships with our parents, and that's in a direct nonfiction way. And then in fiction, of course, like all writers of fiction, in some way or another, to one degree or another, you're always drawing on your experience either as a child of your parents or as a parent to your children or your sibling, your brother to your brother. And that can be a tricky situation to be in. So we thought we'd start with this quote, another quote from Philip Roth, who every so often gotten a little bit of hot water over describing his family relationships or his using his biography in his work. He said, "The world of fiction frees us from the circumscriptions that society places upon feeling." What does that mean?
Well, I think what he means is, I think rather than feeling, he actually means sensibility, and in the sense of being, being circumspect. And again, I'm going to recall something that the advice you gave me early on when I was working on Love and Other Impossible Pursuits.
I'm so full of good advice, by the way.
It's just actually you are full of good advice. There is a moment where there's a part of that book that's very closely tracked to something pretty awful that happened in my family. And I remember calling you. I was away at this writer's retreat in the MacDowell colony. And I remember calling you and I was crying. And I said, how can I write this? How can I write this? And what you said to me is, oh, don't worry about it. You just won't publish it. Just write it. Just write it. And you knew full well that if I wrote it, I was going to publish it. But you just said to me, it'll be fine. And then later on, the second part of that was you said, look, if you are not uncomfortable, if you are not afraid, if you are not at risk, you're not writing close enough to the bone. Mm-hmm. So that feeling of discomfort and that feeling scared and crying when you realize that you're about to expose something, you should be searching that out. Mm-hmm. And then the trick is sort of to say to yourself, oh, well, maybe it won't see the light of day.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that you can say to yourself that I do say to myself, either when I'm drawing on my remembered experience of my parents' marriage or aspects of my parents' life, or when I haven't done that and I've written something, most of my characters, like most of us, have fathers. Any father that I mention in anything I write, probably somebody's going to think I'm talking about my actual father. In that situation, when you are confronted either openly when your parent says to you, that was embarrassing, or thanks a lot, or in the opposite, in the other circumstances where you, I had no intention at all and I wasn't even thinking of my own parent. One thing you can say in that circumstance is that's what you get for having a writer as a kid. Right? I mean, I didn't do this to myself.
I do feel like I think you and I both have a certain callousness when it comes to our parents, writing about our parents, using our parents as material.
All writers. I think
all writers do. But and to their credit, our parents have been very good sport. I mean, I do think my mom has a little bit of PTSD, but from the whole experience. But they have been overwhelmingly
sometimes
supportive.
They get off on it a little bit.
Yes, they do. I think they enjoy it also. But I think things are a little different when they come to our kids. And I've had problems. Like, I don't write about the kids anymore much. Or if I do it in consultation with them much more clearly. Because I thought I was being so careful when I wrote Bad Mother, because I read each kid that any essay was about. I read that essay to the kid and I got their permission. But the permission you give when you're 13 is not the permission you would have given when you were 17 or 18. I have been really careful about writing about them. But they do appear in fiction, and then you just have to do that whole deniability thing,
right,
where
and that's
you say
what the Roth quote is kind of about. The thing with your children is possibly a separate issue, and you maybe do have to construct a certain amount of fences. But even then, having done so, it's no protection
because it seeps through,
and also because people make assumptions that are possibly totally bogus, but they're going to make them anyway. So ultimately, if you went through your life as a writer trying to second guess and predict what's going to offend somebody, what's not going to offend somebody, whether someone's going to recognize themselves in a character, as Ayelet failed to do in that case, or they're going to recognize themselves in a character when you don't even know them at all, you can't. You'll never write. You would never write anything.
I turned 50 this year.
And
Thank you.
I will be 52 in May.
And one of the things that we have found so incredibly curious about this time in our lives, that we have each individually taken this as almost accidentally as an opportunity to do completely new, completely different things with our lives.
But not intentionally, right?
Exactly. Not by any. I didn't set out to do it. You didn't set out to do. So why don't you tell them what the incredibly amazing thing you decided to do?
there's a British-American DJ and record producer and musician named Mark Ronson, who has had a lot of success over the years, and up until very recently had been best known for having produced Amy Winehouse on her Back to Black record. And he showed up at a book party for me and told me he liked my writing, and we shook hands and chatted briefly, and then a year went by and I didn't see him or hear from him, and then he sent me an email out of the blue saying, have you ever given any thought to writing lyrics? I'm starting work on a new album of mine, and I've worked with different lyricists in the past, but this time I'm trying to go in a different direction, and I love your work so much, and I'd like to do something more that has more of a literary kind of narrative feel to the song lyrics, and would you ever consider doing something like that? So by the time you're 50, you have a lot of experience, and you've gotten, hopefully, by that point, pretty good at what you do because you've been doing it for a while. And so because of the time I put in writing, I was able to write myself into a position where a Mark Ronson would pick up one of my books and like it so much he would make this invitation to me. But I think the thing that I notice now in myself is this eagerness. Like when that invitation, that was a pretty irresistible invitation. I probably would have said yes to it.
I don't know. I think 5 years ago you might have been like, that would be cool, but I have so
How
much
could I do that? And I've got all these kids
and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, right. And I've got these books to finish, and what if I don't finish them? Whereas maybe right now I have this more presence, like I always get the work done.
Right.
I will get the work done. I can handle distractions. I handle the distraction of 4 babies, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I can handle that distraction, I can handle this kind of a distraction. And I seized on this opportunity so eagerly, and it was a really magical experience for me. I'm a huge music fan, music lover, and just it was almost like one of those baseball fantasy camps where you pay money and then you get to go shag flies that are being hit at you by Wade Boggs or whoever it is.
He ended up writing in this album, he wrote all of the lyrics to all the songs but 2. And the record is like a #1 record, and it's everywhere. It's going to go gold.
The pleasure of discovering there's something new that you can learn how to do and then maybe get good at it.
Yeah, it's exciting.
That's what I'm looking for now.
Right.
But in addition to that, it's just that collaboration.
Right.
Like writing's so lonely and so solitary, and that's why I started doing it in the first place, because I like to be alone, and sometimes I had no choice in the matter when I was younger. Just to be working with other people, the joy of making music, which I had never really experienced so directly before, and doing it collectively that's what I loved most, I think. Thank you all very much.